Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples, Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How you doing?
Good, Bruce. Good. How are you doing?
I've been doing a little bit of research. I found what might be a workaround if we're still having these commercial problems. Somebody found a workaround that says if you just cut the YouTube URL and you inserted a period at the end of youtube.com before the slash and you left everything else intact, that somehow that kills the ads. So you could cut it, paste it, add a period after .com, a second period, so .com / and then all the rest, and that apparently does something to squelch all the ads. So
is that
the
something
ads are
the
still
listeners would do? Is that
yes?
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it right up front here, in case those stupid ads are kicking in again on this. I welcome listeners to at least give that a try. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's more of a hassle to click skip ads every 30 seconds or whatever the hell it is that's going on. I don't know how YouTube's going to keep customers if they keep doing that kind of trick.
Yeah, I found it was a problem on, not on my desktop.
Yeah, it doesn't happen everywhere. So there's something funky about it that you and I...
But it happened on my one device, but not on the other one.
Right.
I'm just looking at the... Okay, so you get the youtube.com /watch.
Yeah.
So you put it after the...
.com, after com.
After com, you just put a period in there.
Extra period before the slash.
Oh.
And then you stick that in the URL line, start again. So you waste a few seconds doing that, but then hopefully you don't waste any more seconds with these commercial interruptions right in the middle of a sentence. It's not even like they sort of put the commercial in at a normal place.
Very frustrating.
Yeah.
For anyone trying to watch it, I found it extremely...
aggravating as hell.
Yeah. So, Bruce, today we're going to talk about a few things. We're doing our Keep, Hold, or Fold series. We've looked at three players already, Clefbaum, Nurse, and Athanasiou. Coming up are Tyler Ennis and Riley Sheahan, 2 UFAs. So we'll talk about that. We will talk about Bob Nicholson's comment on Oilers Now about the direction of the team this summer. And we will... Is that it? Is that what we're talking about? Is there anything else? Oh, well, there was a little bit of back and forth on Ekman Larson and Kemper on Oilers Now that we'll also talk about. Why don't we just start there, actually?
Sure.
It was Bob Stauffer talking to Elliot Friedman, and Elliot wrote this week in his 31 Thoughts column about the Oilers being interested in Kemper and Ekman Larson.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Anyway, Elliot said he thought he had that right, and he said, "Hey, well, Bob, what do you think? Do you think I have that right, Bob?" And Bob works for the team; he's an Oilers insider. And Bob confirmed, that he thought the Oilers might be interested. Then Bob said, "I don't know how the Oilers can make that work." And
this is Bob Stauffer that says it's not Bob Nicholson.
Bob Stauffer. Excuse me.
Okay, gotcha.
So, Bob is an insider. I think it would be normal for the Oilers definitely to look into Kemper and the price. The Oilers are looking for a goalie. Again, this is one of these situations. Ken Holland isn't doing his job if he's not figuring out the price for Darcy Kemper. I also think, Bruce, if the Oilers had wanted to meet the asking price, which sounds like a first-round draft pick for Kemper, that deal might be made already. The Oilers have a pretty choice mid first-round draft pick, and if they were willing to give that up, you'd think the deal would be done maybe even by now. So I'm kind of skeptical. And as for Ekman Larson, I can see them being interested in the player because he played for Tippett. He was truly a number one defenseman in the league. Every spider sense for me is tingling from what I've watched the player, his age, his contract. It's mainly a contract issue, 7 more years at $8.25 million. How can the Oilers possibly afford that? Like, even, I guess if you moved, the only way I could see you doing it, Bruce, maybe you move the Neil contract completely.
Right.
So that's 3 more years. Is that correct?
3 years at 5.75, million, not counting the 750,000 salary retention on Lucic, which they keep no matter what they do with Neil.
So they'd have to be willing to take that on,
Mm-hmm.
and take, I guess, Chris Russell as well, and maybe something
Why would they
else.
do that? I mean, if they're looking to offload Oliver Ekman Larson, they don't want other people's bad contracts, so they have to pay them instead of Ekman Larson. They're looking to get rid of Ekman Larson's contract.
Yeah, I don't.
It just
I
wouldn't
think there's
make
going to be
sense.
other teams, Bruce, that are more interested in Ekman
Hmm.
Larson and Kemper. If you don't have a true number one goalie going into next year, you're going to offer more than the Oilers are going to offer.
Hmm.
You've got more of a need. You will offer what it takes to get Kemper, and the Oilers have Koskinen. Um, and for Ekman Larson, again, do the Oilers? Yeah, they'd like a number one defenseman. They'd like Ekman Larson, but there's going to be some other team that doesn't even have, like the Oilers had a fairly decent top four last year. Larson, Bear, Nurse, and Clefbaum. The is Ekman Larson? Maybe they're convinced, Tippett and Holland, that Ekman Larson's a cut above. That's what everyone's saying right now. Frankly, I'm skeptical of that claim that Ekman Larson's a better player than those guys, just based on his numbers and what I've seen of his performance. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well,
But
for that
other
money,
teams are going to want it more.
you want to have one of the top 4 or 5 D men in the league. You
Yeah.
know, like where is he on the All Star team? Like, I mean, this is where you're talking upper echelon. We had the same. Well, we had this debate last podcast, and I brought up the PK Subban situation, and I see it as quite similar. And it's one of those things. If you get it wrong, you are hooped. Like, how the hell do you ever get out of it? If let's say he starts to decline, and even if he's still playing, like a several $1 million a year player, but not an $8 million player, you're losing. And
Yeah.
it's hard to see that he would play at such a level where you win that. Just the money side of it, the cap hit side of it. I mean, you're talking about 10% of your entire cap hit of your team for that one player, and the Oilers already have 2 players that make over 10% of the cap hit for the whole team. And you got the right D man, sure, but 29 to 35-year-old guy, that's he's a good player. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know that he's in the super elite class, especially, projecting 5 to 7 years from now.
I There's been too many of these kind of trades and signings for the Oilers, Bruce.
Yep.
And this just strikes me as this would be honestly, like my honest gut feeling is a colossal, my intuition is a colossal mistake. It would be a colossal mistake to bring him in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this guy really is a true number one defenseman right now who will play at that level for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then, maybe a year. But if he was that good, would they even be looking at moving him? I know they have to move salary out, but I don't know. It's just I don't buy this at all as a credible move. So anyway, a little bit
Well,
upset, but to hear that the Oilers are interested. But on the other hand, again,
they're
Holland's
kicking
just
the
they're
tires.
kicking the tires, check, checking things out. It would
If
be
you
crazy for them for not to, to check what the price is, right? That would be nuts not to do it. So
Yeah, well, the price that we know for sure is at $8.25 million, and it's hard to imagine that Arizona would be agreeing to taking any retention out of that. If they're moving on from the player, they want to move on. But so I think it's more smoke than fire. There's
yeah,
plenty of smoke in the air these days now, isn't there?
is does Calgary, like even Calgary, right? Let's say Ekman Larson, Giordano's old. He can't last much longer. I could see a team like Calgary being much more interested. Brody's a free agent. They've
Yeah.
got a couple of young guys. He might
And,
make sense for the Calgary Flames.
and in Kemper.
Yeah, maybe that makes sense, but I just don't.
And
I'm
Calgary's
not
a
a.
first round pick, a little behind the Oilers, of course, because they made the playoffs technically, and Edmonton didn't. So I think they're 19 or something like that. So they might get Kemper with that pick, and they might decide it's worth it if they got 1 more year of Riddick, and they got Talbot as a free agent, who they don't necessarily have to bring back if they find a solution somewhere else. So
Just trying to find a poll that I did on Larson. I think I asked fans what they thought of it, but it might have been a while ago. So
mhm.
Don't know if I can easily find it. Let's just if I do, I'll bring it up. Bruce, what do you think? Let's do the first keep, hold, or fold. Andreas Athanasiou. Where are you in terms of keep, hold, or fold with Athanasiou, and why?
Okay. Uh, I am, as usual, on the fence, but only to a small degree. I said in the post, you hold long enough to get an answer to the question about whether he would be willing to sign a deal at the Oilers' price, which has got to be less than $3 million, I think, under the current environment. He, for all that he played like a $3 million player in 2018-19 when he scored 30 times, and I mean the Oilers certainly could use that kind of scoring power on the wing. He's coming off a brutal season, and he came to Edmonton and he wasn't able to really turn it around. And even after the 4 months layoff, he wasn't able to turn it around and make any impact in the play-ins. And his qualifying offer, $3.0 million, and he's got arbitration rights. And so all of the options that Holland has, I mean, he could do a team-initiated arbitration where the team actually requests that his salary get clawed back by up to 15%. That's messy, and there's no guarantees. He could issue a qualifying offer of 3 million, and that's the low bar, and the player could come back and say, "Okay, I'm going to take it arbitration," and it's a crapshoot. Like, I mean, you and I know that 2020 everything is different, but an arbitrator going by the books of how they've done arbitrations in the past, he might not necessarily do things that way, and he might say, "Well, here's the comparables, and here's a percentage of raises that's normal for this salary." So I don't think you want to go down that road at all. So I think you talk to the player and say, we're thinking more of 1 year, $2 million, or $1.5 million, or whatever. You negotiate, and you say, here's your chance. And this is where Ken Holland has an advantage because he signed this player the last time. I treated you fairly. I gave you 2 years, $6 million. We're in a bind here. You know what it's like here. It's a tough situation. 1 year, you get to play with Connor or Leon some of the times. You have a big year. Next year, we have cap room. Then we can talk about doing something serious. But this is to tide you over and tide us over. We got to lowball you. What do you say? And if he says no, then you look to trade him for whatever you can get.
I
You're
don't
going to
think
lose
you
him
can
for
get
nothing.
anything. Like you'd have
No.
to be trading him to a team. I'm also in the fold camp, though, Bruce. Like I'm in
Yeah,
the
I know
fold
you
camp.
are.
I'm just saying. I don't think in a trade, I'll be surprised because who are you going to trade him to that wants to? They're just going to be in the same position. I think it's incumbent on. It's probably incumbent on, unless the agent's smart. If the agent's smart, he might be thinking, if Ken Holland offers $2 million, I'm jumping on that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. That's what I'm saying.
But
You got to see if there's a price out there because there's no guarantees for this player. But the very last thing you want, I think, is arbitration
yeah,
because you get into that situation and there's a lot of bad scenarios, and the best you can hope for is if the team asks for the arbitration, is he still gets $2.55 million. If you win every cent that you can get, the player's still at over
yeah.
$2.5 million.
There's just I don't
So
see any way.
they have to negotiate with him and say, we hope you liked it here, and here's your chance to stay, and then we'll see. In a year's time, there's going to be way more flexibility, and we're all going to know a lot more about what's the future of hockey is. But this summer, if you're going on the open market, Andreas, you're taking big chances because all the teams are facing this crunch.
I guess
So,
the point I'm trying to make is like for the agent
mm-hmm.
to take that lower offer right now,
Yep.
he has to figure if we wait, he's got to read the tea leaves and think if we wait, it's going to get worse. The
Yep.
time to sign is actually now, not
Yep.
later.
Yep.
Because the normal thing would, well, I'll do my due diligence right now. It looks like he's going to be a UFA. The Oilers aren't going to qualify him. He's going to be UFA. We'll just see what offers come in and we'll go from there. But if he's reading the tea leaves correctly, he might think, he might realize Athanasiou is going to be lucky to get $2 million in a UFA market with this current situation in the NHL. And if the Oilers are offering $2 million right now, or if they're going to trade him to another team, like I'm just trying to think, is there any reason another team would trade for him? And I'm having a hard time thinking of any reason another team would offer anything for Athanasiou right now, unless they think they can sign him for $1 million, $1 million, $8 million,
Right.
and they would accept that. But I don't. Why wouldn't he just take? That's probably what the Oilers are offering. So why wouldn't he just sign with the Oilers? So I don't see any way. My point is, there's no team that's going to trade for this player's negotiating rights. I don't see that happening. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see it.
My point is, you hold until you determine that, and then you fold. And the favored way to fold is try and trade him for something, and the drop dead way to fold is you just don't qualify the guy and you let him walk. And that's looking increasingly like a likely scenario. I mean, the question Ken Holland has to ask himself is not, well, I've invested 2 second-round draft picks in this guy, and now we've got to make something happen. His question is, am I better off spending $3 million on this guy, or can I use that $3 million in this depressed market to bring in better hockey players for that same amount of money? And I think you're going to very much be looking at door number 2 then. And so Athanasiou and his agent got to figure out what's our real price point, given that we don't have a contract, and the Oilers are the only team that can make us an offer right now, but we have no guarantees that if we get to October 9th and he goes on the market that, he might be Riley Sheahan. You remember Riley Sheahan, he had 3 years where he made over $2 million. He made $2.1 million in Florida. And he sat around on the open market for over 2 months before Edmonton signed him in September for $900,000. Like, he made less than half last year than he did the year before.
Yeah.
Athanasiou, he's not 27 like Shayne, so he's not unrestricted. But if he's not qualified, then he is unrestricted. And all bets are off as to, might one team out there say, yeah, we're going to take a chance on this guy. Here's $3 million. Maybe, but I'm thinking that's not a chance that... So if Holland's offering him a decent price, they got to think hard about it. So that's the hold part of my thing. You hold him until you find out about that, and then you got to be prepared to say, man, 2 draft choices for not very much, but we got to move in a different direction.
I don't see them. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
It's not a position of strength,
Sheahan, Bruce. Speaking of Sheahan, he was in contract negotiations with the Oilers.
Sure.
In January. And man, he made a big mistake. He didn't know this. No one knew this. And by not taking whatever the Oilers were offering, because whatever Sheahan was offered then, he ain't getting that now. I can guarantee you that. And this is there was a huge negative reaction when Frank Sarvalli of TSN put out the rumor that the Oilers were trying to trade Athanasiou. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is like the most Oiler thing ever, throwing away assets." But come on, like, back off from that automatic negativity for a second. When they traded for Athanasiou, it looked like he was going to play about 20 games. Yep. They get 20-game window at the end of the season to see this player play. It looked like the cap was going to be 85 to 86 million going up. So it would almost have been automatic. Holland was probably thinking, we're going to qualify this player with the cap going up. And so those 2 factors went out the window. So you can't say this is the most Oilers thing ever. It's like blaming the pandemic on Ken Holland. This decision is completely driven by what happened in the pandemic, which was unknown at that time, and the economics that flow out of that. It changed everything. So I just think it's, like, honestly, I think it's kind of a knee-jerk, stupid comment, if that's what you're saying right now, and that's a rude thing to say to people. So I won't say that on Twitter. I'm just saying it here. I'm not saying it to anyone in particular, but just think again if you're making that argument, because it's not a very strong argument. Ken Holland can't think about the sunk costs of this. He's got to make a decision based on right now. And right now, for $2 million, you might be able to get a better winger than Andreas Athanasiou. Certainly for Andreas Athanasiou at $3 million.
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying attributed to Forrest Gump. Shit happens. And a whole lot of it happened. And when this COVID came down, I mean, it changed everything. You're talking about the cap going up by expected $4 million. Well, Holland's got something like $8 million to play with, and he's got to get a goalie, a 3C, 3 other players. And he's got 18 players under contract. That's just to get to 23-man roster. And he's got about $8 million to play with. This is assuming spending all the way to the cap. And if the salary cap had gone up by $4 million, then you'd have $12 million to play with, and it changes the equation entirely when you're talking about the marginal sort of 5 extra players for 8 million versus 5 extra players for 12 million. That's a huge difference. And that just went away. And unfortunately, he was, he signed maybe a couple contracts that he might regret now, and especially the Zach Kassian contract, but even the Josh Archibald pact.
Yeah.
2 years, $1.5 million, nice raise for, a fairly useful player. Well, if they hadn't signed that, they would probably be able to get him for less.
$1 million.
Yeah.
And Kassian right now, would probably be signing a 2-year deal at $2 million a year, something like that. And again,
half the term and significantly lower cap hit, and it's unfortunately by getting ahead of the curve, when the curve suddenly collapsed and crashed into the COVID crisis, and those decisions look really bad in retrospect. But who could have seen it coming?
The only guy I know was that guy working at Alberta Health Services who ordered all those supplies in December. He should have been advising Ken Holland. Okay, Bruce, let's go with we've been speculating on what's going to happen back and forth. Are they going to go big? Like we had Brian Lawton's prediction that they would trade 2 out of 4 top 4 D-men, which is kind of the most aggressive statement I've heard about what might happen this summer. We've heard other people. Kurt Levins was writing about maybe going for a number 1 goalie, like not just possibly a guy to play in tandem with Koskinen. But it was very interesting. I think that the things are kind of simmering down now, and I'm taking final confirmation of this from Bob Nicholson today. He was on Oilers Now, and Bob asked him why the team, what he was thinking with the team didn't making the playoffs, and Bob said just bluntly that they weren't good enough. And which is a fairly accurate comment. And then he talked about what's going to happen in the offseason. And we're going to try something here, Bruce. I'm just going to play the clip and let's see if you can hear it. Yeah. I think I have it. This is Bob Stauffer and Bob Nicholson on Oilers Now.
We've got 2 of the best players in the world, and we're not going to make huge changes, but we're going to tinker with this lineup and make us a better hockey club, and maybe more importantly, get us so we're more consistent for not just 1 year, but a number of years ahead of us.
All right. So not huge changes, just tinker with things, Bruce. And this is kind of where I think both of us, if I'm not mistaken, in the last few days at least, maybe you were always there, but it's where I've kind of ended. Like I was kind of distracted by the shiny things of a new goaltender and maybe a big trade of one of these top defensemen. But Holland himself made it clear at the end of the year when people were really losing their minds after the playoffs that he was going to go with continuity and patience. And now so that was out of his mouth right after the playoffs.
Right.
Continuity and patience. And now we have Nicholson saying no huge moves, tinkering. Mm-hmm. And what I've come to realize, looking at the salary cap closely, thinking it through, this is by far the best policy, unless there's a deal that hits you over the head in being a great deal, just an absolute steal from some team having to, shed salary because they're just, they're having a bargain basement sale. The Oilers don't have a lot of options because they have the $7 million, $8 million cap ceiling to bring in these players. I like the idea at this point of gradualism, incrementalism. I think it's with this particular team, with the young prospects they have coming up on defense. Yes, and with the conundrum that they have of finding who to play with Connor McDavid, which isn't necessarily, trade everything for Patrick Laine or Nikolai Ehlers from Winnipeg. I think you can solve that problem with McDavid in a different way with a less expensive player. So I liked the sound of what Nicholson said there, and I liked what Holland, when Holland said that, I found it reassuring at the time. I think he nailed it, and I think Nicholson confirmed it, and I liked it. What's your thought?
Yeah, well, I remember that postseason avail with Holland, and he mentioned that basically last year they turned over a lot of players, like in the bottom 6, like they do every time they change GMs every 2 years. And he said that he wouldn't be doing that, and the proof's in the pudding because of all the guys that he brought in, or at least who came up and made the team last year, if you want to include Patrick Russell, to names like Gaetan Haas, Joachim Nygaard, Josh Archibald, that he brought in last summer and has already extended. So there's going to be some continuity in the bottom six, and there's just a couple guys left that we're going to talk about. But 12 of the forwards are under contract. So barring a trade, the Oilers up front are going to look pretty similar to what they did before. So really, the only way to shake things up in a significant way is to up front is to make a trade, and there's a little bit more room on the back end, and especially in goal, they have one guy locked up, but they have a lot of options for the second goaltender.
Yeah.
But that's an incremental decision. That's unless they go out and make a splashy trade and bring in an expensive guy, or somehow move out Koskinen and bring in a more expensive guy or whatever. I mean, that would be, that would be a major move. But I'm envisioning a Koskinen goalie X pairing last year with Koskinen playing 50 to 60% of the games, and the other guy being a regular that is competing to get as much as half the ice time. And they're going to want a good, solid veteran goalie. And I think a lot of people think they need to move on and upgrade from Mike Smith.
Yeah, I thought actually Alan Mitchell in The Athletic wrote a really good piece on the weekend, and
he tends to do that.
And he put forward a number of incremental moves, such as signing, like for the top six, Jesper Fast from the Rangers.
I like that a lot. That's
for third line center. I think it was Thomas Nosek from Vegas as a possibility, and then as a goalie, I think Aaron O'Dell. So I think if you had the wish lists of Oilers fans 2 weeks ago, those names would not be at the top of the list, Bruce. When names like Kemper and Ekman Larson are being bandied about, and Aaron Ekblad from Florida, blah blah blah.
Ehlers,
and Ehlers, Liney, and then moving out, names being bandied about, Clefbaum, Nurse, whatever. I don't think any of that's going to happen. I'd be surprised at this point. And Allen, I don't know if he's got the players right, but his idea is correct. And I've been writing about the same idea in my McDavid series, finding the right winger to play with McDavid. It's not necessarily Patrick Laine or Nikolai Ehlers. He's a player like Crosby in Pittsburgh's played with players like Brian Rust and Connor Sheary and Chris Kunitz. That's the kind of player that I think might fit in just fine with Connor McDavid. And you don't have to break the bank to get those players, because he's such a unique player to fit in with. He dominates the puck like Crosby. It's not like Ehlers. Isn't Ehlers kind of? I think his game's carrying the puck. Like, he's tricky with the puck. I don't see him necessarily being a great fit. Now, Laine would be obviously great. A shooter like that to play with Connor McDavid would be wonderful, but you can't afford him. It's not going to happen. So,
third guy better be good at defense.
Oh God, yeah, you better have a third defenseman out there.
Who's the best guy? I think that the Oilers have brought in that wound up playing a lot with McDavid was Patrick Maroon.
Yes.
And you would not have said at first, that this is a good fit necessarily. He's too slow. There's reasons that you wouldn't think he'd fit, but he was smart. He didn't need to have the puck on his stick a lot of the time. He provided some physical play. He went to the front of the net and he looked for passes on his stick that he could tap home. And he did a lot. And he had a very successful season and a pretty decent second year, even though they wound up trading him because, of course, his contract was expiring. And he wound up signing much cheaper in St. Louis, and they wound up cheaper still signing in Tampa Bay, and he might wind up with 2 Stanley Cups in the following 2 years, Patrick Maroon. So worked out well for him. But they got to find a guy like that. And they found him on the discard pile, right? Anaheim was so desperate to get rid of a winger that year at the trade deadline. They brought in, I think, 3 wingers, and all of a sudden they went, holy mackerel, we got a lot of wingers. We better move one. Right at like 3 o'clock hour at the very end of the trade deadline, they shipped him to Edmonton, and they kept $500,000 of his $2 million cap hit. So the Oilers got this player $1.5 million for 2 years, and he's, like I say, barring Draisaitl, who obviously they didn't bring in to be McDavid's winger. But they went out and found a guy who could play with McDavid. And to me, the best was Maroon. And I'm not saying they have to find his clone. I'm just saying they have to find another player off the discard pile somehow that isn't costing $3 or $5 or $18 million to play. I mean, they got the big money guys. They need to find economies that those top guys can play with and outscore with.
Those were back in the days when the Oilers, when Chiarelli was, you know, in the early days, he won a few trades, the Kassian trade, the Talbot trade, and obviously the Maroon trade. And I just remember when they got Maroon, I was ecstatic because I always thought he was a really good hockey player. Like he just was, he's exactly the kind of players the Oilers never had. Big, tough guy who can make a play. And that's what McDavid could be with. Big, tough guy. Like Kassian actually did okay. Like he wasn't great. But, you know, that wasn't, you know, there was worse fits than Kassian than with McDavid. You just need someone with a bit more skill to be on the other side then. But, yeah, Maroon's better defensively than Kassian. But Kassian was good last year. There were, you know, with McDavid for much of the year. And then he just fell off after that new contract. Bruce, let's, there's two more players upcoming. We're going to be looking at Riley, Sheahan, and Tyler Ennis, which is keep, hold, or fold. Maybe it would be more like grab or fold because they're UFAs. So the Oilers actually, it's more straightforward. They can't hold them. They don't have no hold.
Either keep them or they move on from them.
So, what's your take? Let's do Ennis first. Keep or fold.
Okay. My inclination, and I'm going to research this more before we write this post. So the podcast might not match the post. I'll say you right now. But my inclination is to try and keep Tyler Ennis if they can keep the price anywhere near where he is. It's useful to have depth scoring, which he provides. I don't see him as a top 6 player, but I do see him as a guy that can move up into the top 6 on occasion. Like to me, he's like Mike Camilleri was, or, you know, player of that nature where, you know, he's an experienced guy. He knows how to put the puck in the net on occasion. He's not a long-term fix as a, you know, to a overarching problem. He's a piece, but he's a useful piece, and he did okay in his time here. Scored a little bit. I think there was one goal against that I thought he was a little out to lunch, but it wasn't like he was a disaster on the defensive side of the puck. And the thing that both of these guys are fighting, and just to put them briefly in the same category, the Oilers have 12 forwards coming back. They have these 2 unrestricted free agents. If they sign those 2 guys, they got the whole same forward core that they ended the season with. And then how do you change that? So they may be, you know, if there's a game of musical chairs, let's say there is, and there's 12 chairs, well, guess what? They're all taken. So they could wind up both being in the fold camp. Mind you, 2 veteran forwards like Sheahan and Ennis, both making under $1 million a year. You're not going to do better than that unless you can spend the same money and get a better veteran.
I really liked Ennis's game. He played well with McDavid. He did okay. He did okay with Draisaitl and Yamamoto in the playoffs. Not great, but okay. He wasn't Nugent Hopkins out there. I'm still hurting about that, Bruce. I'll be hurting about that a long time.
But the Oilers were worse off after he got hurt in Game 3.
They were worse off because Athanasiou just did not come close to being able to fit in with Draisaitl and Yamamoto. He was just the wrong fit there. Yeah, I like Ennis. I think he can play with McDavid. I think he's a smart enough player to play with McDavid. I don't know why he wasn't with McDavid in the playoffs, quite honestly. He should have been. So if you can get a player who might be able to fit in with Connor McDavid and put up, like, let's say 40 points with McDavid, I would sign that guy in a second. And the fact that you might be able to get him for $800,000, like if you can sign him, the quicker the better. I would sign Tyler Ennis to a new contract, and I hope that that happens. Riley Sheahan, Bruce. Again, this is leading into another of my pet peeves through the regular season and then into the playoffs. I don't know why you would ever play Sheahan and Kara on the same line. They're just 2 big, slow guys who are the same player, kind of the same strengths, somewhat same strengths and somewhat same weaknesses. And I think you have to have one or the other on the team. I don't think you'd want both. So if they can't move, I think actually Sheahan's slightly better of the two players. He's a better penalty killer, slightly better at even strength, slightly more consistent. So I would, if I had to pick, I would pick Sheahan, but it's Kara who has the contract for next year at 1.2 million. Mm-hmm. And if they can't move Kara, then you can't bring Sheahan back. I don't think. I just think it's too much of a replication. You need a speedy center. You need, if you're going to play Kara as your fourth line center with let's say Neil and Chiasson, which was not a bad line in the playoffs, then you need a speedy center. You need that, and you can't play them together. Like that never worked. And why Tippett went back to that in the playoffs? I guess I don't know. I never understood that at the time. I didn't like it because that line was never very. It was always weak when you had Sheahan and Kara out there. They just weren't able to cycle the puck, get offensive zone time, and they weren't strong on their own end either.
Yeah, he brought Haas in for Game 4 after the Ennis injury, and Haas being a center and Kara being a center winger, they shifted Kara over to the left wing where Ennis had been playing, and shuffled the lines. But at the beginning of camp and right through the first part of the year when all three were healthy, which wasn't all the time, they had Shayne, Archibald, and Kara was the default checking line. And the only fast guy of the three was Archibald, and both Shayne and Kara, as you say, there's a lot of similarities. Pretty lumbering skaters, both big men, 6'3", 210-pound kind of guys. Both good penalty killers. Shayne pretty good on the dot, and Kara getting better on the dot. I mean, he's a little, hasn't got the experience playing center, but coming on a bit. But at even strength, they both got caved on the goals for percentage. Like Sheahan, he was on the ice for 17 goals for, 37 against at 5-on-5, like more than 2-1. And that's a way smaller sample, of course, than flow of play statistics, which were, in the sort of mid 40% range, not 31% or whatever that goal share was, but still, underwater. And you expect that a little bit in your bottom six, but that getting pounded on the goal share by that much kind of took away from the advantages of the the better penalty kill. Well, you got a guy who's good on the penalty kill, but he's minus 20 at 5-on-5. How far ahead are you? So I got him. There's things I like about the player, and I wrote about him last summer when he was on the market and said he might be a decent fit here, and they actually did go out and sign him, and he did provide more or less the things that it looked like he might provide based on his stats and things he'd said and so on. But can they upgrade on him? I think probably they can. So I'm reluctantly, and because I think they're going to want to change something out, I'm kind of reluctantly in the fold position.
Yeah, I would say fold as well. Although my preference is move out Kara and bring.
Yeah, that's a reasonable alternative. But if you're talking about simply bringing him back and sort of bringing back all 14 forwards that were so great together in the playoffs, I'm thinking, maybe we need some fresh legs in there somewhere in the mix.
Yeah, they need some change. You're right, Bruce. So when we look at the replays of the goals and we try to figure out who made mistakes on goals for and against, Sheahan contributed to 15 goals for, major contribution to 15 goals for, and major mistake on 19 goals against, which isn't terrible for a center in his role, but it's not. You'd like him to be in the positive. Like Haas was 11-4, 10 against, but Kara, who was more on the wing, he contributed to 11 goals and made major mistakes on 18 against. So for a winger, that's really bad. Like, honestly. So if they can move Jujar Kara, that would be I would give them a lot of credit. Holland a lot of credit if he can make that trade, because Kara at $1.2 million, when you can get a player like that, like a big tough physical winger, probably for $800,000-900,000 this year, league minimum.
That's what they paid Sheahan, right?
So yeah, I don't know if they can. I doubt they can move Kara. So that means bye Riley Sheahan, I think. And I don't think there's going to be much debate about that. It's going to be, I just want to add one thing, Bruce, about this whole idea of the Oilers taking it slow, like tinkering.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I like that is I think it's more of you're in a wait and see mode this summer a little bit. You're not the person looking to make the big splash. You're let all the people splash, or make the big splashes. Everyone else blow your brains out on day one of free agency, make all the big trades, do all that kind of stuff. We'll just take it easy, see what happens, and then kind of fill in around the edges, because I think there's going to be great bargains as the off season, goes along. You get into into November, and the season's looming and players are sitting around and they're looking. I think you're going to be able to get a lot of players at league minimum who can really help your team, and they're close to league minimum. So I like that. If that's going to be the Oilers' approach, I'm wholly would endorse that.
Yeah, I mean, the trade market, maybe that's the way to find a goalie, where you have cost certainty, but also, established performance of the goalie. If there's a way that you parlay that Chris Russell
that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
into a
goalie.
Carter Hutton. That was one I think John Willis suggested. Was it John? That was.
Yeah, it was. Something he mentioned Carter.
Russell had the higher cap hit, but Hutton had the higher amount of money owed. So to a budget team like Buffalo, it actually works out. And for the Oilers, they get an established number 2 goalie that's been around the league for a few years, and he's Aaron Dell the third. There's lots of those sort of reasonable level netminders out there, and one way to get them is by trade. And if you move out a contract to bring in a contract, that's all right. So here's my wild and crazy trade for a goalie. Straight up, trade is 1-for-1. James Neal for Marc-Andre Fleury. Who says no?
Vegas.
Yeah?
Well, it's the third year of Neal's deal that's the killer, right?
Yeah.
It's the third year.
3 years to 2, but it's Fleury's at $7 million and very much on the outs with the organization. Was sitting on the bench while they lost in the conference final. And so they may be looking for a resolution there. I'm just saying that's the kind of crazy stuff you might explore.
Could the Oilers afford that? I guess they could afford that. They could afford that. That's a good deal.
They're getting their second goalie. They're paying a little bit more, but now the goalie situation is resolved.
The Oilers don't say no.
Just throwing it out there that and Neal had a good year in Vegas, and Vegas was having trouble scoring goals in the playoffs.
So Carter Hutton's save percentage the last 3 years, 931, down to 908, down to 898 this year. So, maybe, how old is he? He's not young. The wheels fallen off the Carter Hutton. He's 34.
Some people, is he really?
34?
Wow.
Yeah.
He must have come up late. He hasn't been around that long.
No, he's got a career save percentage of 911, which is pretty good. And he had that one really great year, right?
Right. If you're looking for a backup, though, that's the kind of thing where you move a salary to bring in a salary, but a different position, being goal. You've resolved your goalie position, and you haven't impacted your cap hit that much because you moved somebody out to get him.
Depends where Chris Russell's no trade teams are. Is Buffalo one of them? He probably has Buffalo. He might not have Arizona. So, there's lots of.
Well, I heard there's 17 budget teams out there now. There was a great article. If people are on The Athletic or have a way to get into reading this article by Scott Burnside on the sort of the new paradigm that's ruling the 17. NHL world. 17 teams that have said something about playing to an internal budget below the salary cap. So Chris Russell can only submit 15 that he can't be traded to. So that leaves at least 2 that.
Well, my predictions looking better every day. I predicted they'll be able to move him. It's not that far out on a limb, but it's not an easy trade to make. It certainly wasn't looking it to be easy, but that's making me more and more hopeful that they can make that trade. Marc-Andre Fleury's save percentage is not that great in the last couple of years either. I do not believe. Let me just check that. But would Vegas make that, Bruce? I think they're going to have. Although I heard the buyout word, the B word, the B letter was spoken buyout today. I heard that on Oilers Now. So
for who?
For Fleury.
For Fleury,
Vegas might have to buy him out. So Fleury's save percentage in the last 2 years has been .913 and .905.
Okay. And how many games did he play?
61 and 49. So
he's so old now. Like, to me, he could probably be a good goalie if he was playing 30, 35, 40 games. If you're asking him to play 61 because your backup is Malcolm Subban and you don't trust him, then he's going to wear down at age 35 or whatever he is now, 36. Yeah. So he and his agent have got to be looking for the right place to land in. I'm just saying, you think he's way out of bounds? Well, we got a contract that's pretty out of bounds too. How about we do this? We solve your problem and you solve ours, and we work with our new problems.
I guess that might be. Would that be better than a buyout? Let's just deal with that, Bruce, since you raised it. Is it better than a buyout for Vegas? Probably better than a buyout. Like, you'd have to think. Do they think James Neal can help us in any way? Could he be like a fourth line guy who we could put on the power play? They had a pretty hard. They had some pretty hard time scoring some goals in the playoffs.
They had 8 goals in 5 games against Dallas, and they had 2 goals that weren't empty netters in their last 3 games against Vancouver. So throw out those 2 empty netters in Game 7 that turned it from 1-0 to 3-0. And in their last 8 games, they scored 10 goals on a goalie. So you got to know they're burning, saying we need somebody who can put the puck in the net. So, I mean, that may or may not be. That may or may not be James. Jeez, David, I don't know if you're taking a $7 million contract off their hands.
But that third year, Bruce, if it was even years, I would agree with you. But because there's that third year, because there's the third year, I don't know. Like I think you have to. I don't think the Oilers could say, "Well, we'll retain on the third year." Like, we'll retain half on the third.
I don't think.
I think it has to be every year, right? So I don't think. Listen, I don't think that would be Vegas's first pick as a trade. But if there's nothing else out there, is it better? That's why I'm asking. Is it better than the buyout? And the buyout probably hurts a lot, right? Buyouts just suck. We know that.
And they linger. I mean, we're still paying for Benoit Pouliot, for goodness sake.
Well, what would that be?
He's been gone for however 2-3 years now. He's still on the friggin' payroll.
Would that be like 4 years to buy him out? That's 4 years
at 2.333, 2/3 of his salary, so a third of each year. So he'd be 4 years at $2.33 million against Vegas. And if Edmonton were to buy out Neal, it would be 6 years at $1.9 million. So you're dealing with the lower amount, but the longer stretch. So it's just,
Oilers aren't buying out Neal. That's
no, and I don't think Vegas is buying out Fleury, because the buyout just means
brutal.
You open up cap space, but you have to spend it on some other guy, or the move makes no sense at all in some ways. So anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. We're talking about a bad contract for a bad contract. Trade your bad contract for somebody else's bad goalie contract, but it's still the goalie himself is okay. He's just not a $7 million goalie. But you're going to.
Does he have a no-move thing in his contract?
I would dare say he's willing to waive it at this point. I mean, you remember that nice Photoshop that his agent posted, Alan Walsh posted on Twitter, with Fleury being stabbed by a great Vegas spear. I would suggest he's willing to waive that no movement clause at this point.
That was not a good. I guess if you want the goalie to move, it's a good move. Like if you want to spread poison during the stand, boy, I would be mad if I was a Vegas fan if some agent pulled that stunt. That was
that was Bush League, I thought, by Al Walsh. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it made its impact, but
here's one thought.
Splashy for my life.
In the last couple of days, Bob Stauffer's been asking his guests about, with Vegas, do you think that they got a little over-aggressive? They fired the popular coach in Gerard Gallant. They brought in the goalie to replace Fleury, who was this popular guy, and then they, instead of using him as a backup, they kind of went with him. Mm-hmm. And it did get me thinking, Bruce, because I did that research into teams that make the Stanley Cup Finals. Who's your goalie? And it seems like that goalie's been there a while. He's on the team. He's kind of at the heart of the team, usually or often. He's been in the organization at least. He's worked his way up. And it just maybe there is some psychological thing where with the goalie to have that kind of connection, organizational connection, longtime goalie with the team. Maybe Bob's onto something there with Fleury. Like if they had stuck with it, it's like you dance with the one who brung you, and isn't that the expression?
It is the expression, but I've got enough counter examples to Craig Binnington.
But he was with the organization forever.
He was with the org, but they called him up, and he, second half of the season, he was a rookie. Matt Murray was, I think, a rookie when Pittsburgh won the first cup. Cam Ward was a rookie, and Dwayne Rollison was new to his organization. I mean, I'm going back a few years, but that's a cup final that stands out for obvious reasons. I mean, some of both, but obviously, I mean, Braden Holtby, for instance, he was the go-to guy in Washington for many years, and he finally won the cup. So that's that's one that supports the case that you're making.
The only one in the last year who wasn't with the organization, and I take your point with Binnington, he was in the minors, but the only one who wasn't with the organization who came in that year is what's his name, Jones? Is it Matt Jones? Went to San Jose?
Martin Jones.
Martin Jones from LA to San Jose. Martin Jones. That was the only one who came in, and he came in at the start of the year, and he was with San Jose that whole year, and he took his team. Every other goalie had been with the organization.
This is recent cup finals.
Since in the last 8 seasons, since the last CBA, and I think that's when you have to date. If you're going to do these kind of looks at things, it has to be in this current cap era. So Fleury has a no movement, no trade clause with 10 teams on it. So probably every Canadian team. Although you never know, he might be the kind of guy who would be okay going to Canada to come play hockey, and he might be the kind of guy who would waive the no trade clause. Just to get
I don't think the no trade clause is an issue in the specific case of Marc-Andre Fleury.
But Bruce, he might be looking for a buyout. He could get the buyout and then sign with whoever the heck he wants, right? That's the best situation for the player, is it not? Get the buyout.
As long as he can sign for a third of his old value, then he's going to break even. If he gets bought out and he signs somewhere for $1.5 million, like Andriy Sekera did, Andriy Sekera lost money this year because of the buyout. He got some of his contract, and then he got a new contract, but the two of them together didn't make up for what he would have been paid if he hadn't been bought out.
So what do you think Fleury could get? $3 million, even in this cap kind of maybe.
I don't know.
3 top.
He got bought out.
Top $3 million, maybe
bought
2. Out.
And that agent and all that. I mean,
yeah, he's
a name player, maybe, but this year there's so few guarantees. I mean, the whole industry is really under the gun, and it's hard to tell how this thing's going to fall out. But this upcoming October free agent season is going to be a real eye-opener. It's going to be different from ones that we've seen in the past by a lot.
17 budget teams, Bruce. Thanks for saying that. That made my day. I'm going to go read that article right now.
Scott Burnside wrote it for The Athletic, and he just talked about how are they going to play the 2021 season? What, when might it start? What might it look like? Are they going to try and do bubbles? Are they, how are they going to get fans in the stands? How many fans do you need to break even? If you had 5,000 fans in a 17,000 seat arena, but you needed 10,000 to break even, how does that work for the teams? Are they building a bridge to a more secure future, or are they just building it from one side and they don't know what's on the other side? This bubble playoffs, give them credit, they pulled it off, but one of the points of the story was that the bubble playoffs had a beginning and end date, and it was contained, whereas the future is quite an open book. And with COVID continuing to ravage United States and also growing cases again in BC and Ontario, I understand, and getting worse here in Alberta, so this thing is just not bending to our will, and it's hard to say, when it's going to run its course or how it's going to get, whether it's a vaccine or treatment. I mean, there's all these questions that are totally beyond the realm of hockey.
Yeah.
That something's going to have to work out. So anyway, there's a whole lot to chew on in that article, and uncertainty is the word of the day.
My prediction, Bruce, my
Mhm.
hot take prediction is the Oilers will be playing, the NHL will be playing before fans in January.
Okay, I hope you're
And
right.
I'm basing that on, although there's more cases, the death rate in across the world seems to be down significantly. In Alberta this month, 3 people have died from COVID. 3 people. And that's down from 20 something in August and 70 something in July. So I don't know what's happening. I haven't looked into it. I haven't talked to anyone, but just going on what I'm seeing in Alberta and around the world in terms of death rates, I'm kind of hopeful that there certainly could be a rebound, though, in this fall. So we'll see what happens. We'll know
Yeah,
more. My main point with COVID is we're going to know a hell of a lot more. So will the
yeah.
NHL in 2 months in November. We'll
But
have a much better sense of where this is. And but my prediction is at this point that we'll have fans on. I'm not saying every seat, but maybe every third seat or second seat will be filled when they get back to playing. Now, whether people will want to go watch and take that risk is another question.
the October free agency situation is it, those questions aren't even going to be begun to be answered by then.
Oh, they will
I guess
not
the
be.
other thing you can look at, I mean, you talked about Oilers trying to move on from Jujhar Khaira at $1.2 million. Now, there may be some team out there, some team that's established an internal budget, and they say, we got this useful veteran at 1.2 or $1.5 million, but we got players in the system coming up that we can pay the NHL minimum to, and we can save ourselves 5 or 800,000 or $1 million
Yeah.
and just move on from this guy. That's where you can find a bargain, where you can get a significant hockey player who doesn't have that big a ticket, but the other team is saving incrementally. So they move on from him, and maybe they trade him for a pick or a prospect or something. And maybe that's a market that you really got to watch
But I'm not
carefully.
sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Like, is this the Oilers being able to move
This is the
Kara?
Oilers. No, this is the Oilers being able to get a player like Kara, like his contract, from some other team, or the other
For
teams
Kara?
uh, just being able to get a better player from
Oh,
another team
yeah.
that's 1.2, $1.5 million, and the other team says, yeah, he's all right, but we can replace him for $700,000. And the
Yes.
Oilers
Oh,
might
I
look
see
at
what
that
you're saying.
same guy and say, hey, that guy's going to be an upgrade on our team, and we can get him for cheap because this team is on a budget. Let's go get him. So
Yeah, I could
that's,
see. So if another team thought, like another team might have in mind that Jujhar Kara actually is that player who is just the guy they
yeah.
need because
Mhm.
he offers, like, let's say they're a smaller team that lacks physicality, and they say we need a tough guy, and Jujhar, he fights now and then for his teammates. He's a big physical player. He's the guy, and so we'll take him off your hands. I don't
Mhm.
actually think that's going to happen. Like, another team's going to make
Right.
that calculation with Kara. I would bet against that actually at this
Mhm.
point. But yeah, the Oilers might be able to get a center, a third line center that way, where they're bringing in that player who's being paid that amount of money, who the other team thinks they can replace with a minor leaguer. That could easily happen. I agree.
Mhm.
Let's leave it there, Bruce.
Yeah. Oh, we were going to talk a little bit about the Nurse and Klefbom that we.
Oh, just real
That's what.
quick, because we've already
Yeah.
had an hour here, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. This was the part uh, where Nicholson and Holland are saying we're not going to do the big moves, and obviously if they do OEL, all bets are off. But I was in our review of Keep Holder Fold on the Oilers. I looked at some of the numbers for Nurse, and he's been in the league 5 years now. And if someone had told you 5 years ago, David, that this big, young, promising, fast, tough defenseman from years 3 to 5 of his career would be in the top 5 in the NHL in ice time, even strength ice time, and in the top 5 in the NHL in process things, shots on goal, rush attempts, individual scoring chances, high danger chances. The guy is a scoring chance machine. Judging from the data from Natural Stat Trick, he gets into the danger areas and stuff happens. And even when you say, well, he's got so much ice time, that's why he's ahead of everybody else. So if you take the error out of that and say, how much per 60? He is basically in the top 10 in the NHL in all those categories. So you're looking for an offensive defenseman. Well, you got a 25-year-old guy there that's been bringing it for 3 years, and he produces points. Like, he's 6th in assists, 7th in points, 5v5 over that span. In 3 years, I mean, that's more than half his career. And he's still a guy on the rise, and I recognize he's got warts, but as I keep saying, as we come back to, you got to recognize the good with the bad. And when you see top 5, top 10 among all defensemen in the NHL, that's a bit of an eye popper. That maybe he's more proactive, more dynamic than people realize. I'm a booster, and I was surprised to see him that high up in all those categories.
I would only put one proviso on those process stats, like rushing the puck. They have a stat for rushing it, right? Rush attempts. I checked Connor McDavid's number, and I would advise anyone, and if memory serves, and you have to fact check me on this, he wasn't number 1 in the NHL. He wasn't in the top 10. He wasn't in the top 30. I think he was like 70th. So if Connor McDavid ranks 70th for rushing the puck up the ice, there's something wrong with your stat. Your stat is highly suspect. If the easily the best player rushing the puck up the ice. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll correct myself next podcast, but I don't think I'm wrong. So because I was using that stat a year ago to rate Nurse as well, and I thought I'll just check this out.
Well, that's one of several stats.
Yeah. But then the other, so I'm not sure about, and I would say check all those process stats. See, like, in terms of creating high danger scoring chances, where does McDavid rank? And if he's not in the top 10, then think, oh, is this stat really, how are they getting this? Is this accurate? That's all I'd say.
I was doing it comparing only to other defensemen. So
fair enough.
Wasn't in the equation. And the guys that Nurse was hanging with at the top of the charts was guys you would expect to see at the top of the charts. So it kind of rang true in terms of the names around him. I go, holy moly, Darnell Nurse looks good by this, and he looks good by that. And it's this just on the offensive side of the game, of course, and many rail against his defensive work, but there's a lot of player in Darnell Nurse, and he's been delivering all that on the cheap. Like we keep hearing about how good Klefbom's contract is. Well, over these 3 years, Darnell Nurse made more than $5 million less than Oscar Klefbom did. So
yeah.
But his agent was rumored to once have asked for a long-term contract in the $8 million range as a starting position. Therefore, Nurse's contract is anathema to some. And I'm just, that was a negotiating ploy. They wound up meeting in the middle. Let's see what happens next time, and let's see what the player does in between times. In the meantime, this year coming up, he's a lock to be on the team. Next summer is sort of that's the time when they're going to have to take stock and say, are we going to want to go deep with this guy? If we're going to move on, he's got a year left. Now is the time to move. But right now, he's got 2 years left, and he and Klefbom are both Oilers in 2021, and they've got a real solid base there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm just going to look up this McDavid number in case I'm incorrect. I can correct myself at once. So shots, IXG. If I can figure out a way to view full screen. Yeah, I don't see them moving Klefbom or Nurse. Let me see.
And I don't see it as the end of the world if they don't.
Okay, rush attempts. Okay, here we are, rush attempts. Regular season rush attempts. This can't be right, can it? It says leading the league was Kachuk at 20. Oh, maybe I'm wrong, Bruce. Rush attempts, McDavid was 4th in the league. 15 rush attempts. What are they?
I don't know. I don't know how.
I must be doing this wrong.
I don't know what they're counting.
Yeah. Well, this is it says for 64 games, and they had McDavid at 15 rush attempts. I mean, McDavid has 15 rush attempts in a week in the NHL. So anyway, I'm just
Yeah, I mean,
He's
Darnell,
higher than I thought, though. So
Darnell, we're talking about 25 over 3 years. So obviously they're talking about a big sort of rink length dash kind of thing. It must be, but that's not a category where I know exactly how they rate it. But individual scoring chances, individual high danger chances, certainly shots. Those are all categories that we're have a little more understanding of, and you want to have a lot of all those things, and Darnell does.
yeah, what I would do is go through all these, maybe go through all these and have a closer look. So I'm going to just put a check on my criticism of these stats. Maybe there's more validity to them than I thought, but I'm in the skeptical camp, but I'm willing to be persuaded that these are useful stats. All right, Bruce, why don't we leave it there?
That seems like an excellent idea, David.
Okay, talk to you later.